What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So even though we're just a little bit over a month into the NHL season, there is already rampant trade talk and speculation across the league. Some fans that hate new players on their teams or older guys on their teams that finally are on expiring deals and can get traded. Obviously, the biggest of which is a guy like Nikita Zadorov that straight up came out and his agent said that he wants a trade. So I thought it'd be a fun idea to, first, we're going to look at my old list that I made in August of my top 10 trade board and then revise it based off a couple factors. And when looking at this, the factors that I'm going to be looking at is one, how likely it is that they get traded. Obviously, that does play a factor. But not only that, also how good they are. You got to add the how good they are, because if it was just how likely it is to get traded, it'd just be like Chicago Blackhawks and San Jose players that are on expiring deals that are like fourth liners, bottom sixers that don't have a lot of value. So we're going to do how good they are, how likely it is that they are going to get traded, and potentially how imminent a trade could be in terms of like now or at the trade deadline. Obviously, if it's closer to happening soon, they're going to be higher on the list. So those three factors. Let's look at the old one that I had in August. Connor Hellebuck, Noah Hannafin, Elias Lindholm, Mark Scheifele, Scott Laughton, Anthony Mantha, Backlund, Konechny, Hart, Nylander. So obviously, a lot has changed. Hellebuck and Scheifele obviously signed extensions. William Nylander's not getting traded while he's playing top 5 hockey in the entire league. So in looking at that, I thought it'd be a fun idea to revise it. So without further ado, let's dive into number 10. And at number 10 is Shawn Monahan. He's really killing it for the Montreal Canadiens right now. He has 6 goals, 7 assists for 13 points in 18 games. And he's playing 18-21 a night, which is third on the entire team, only behind Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. So this guy is really, after falling off a cliff in Calgary for the most part, from above a point per game season, or I think he had 78 points maybe at his peak in like 2016, just went down a cliff, ends up getting traded for the Montreal Canadiens. They attach a first-round pick to him. He has a good first season in Montreal, but obviously he gets hurt pretty early on, but he was going for like 55-point pace, and he seems to be picking up where he left off. And in terms of the Montreal Canadiens, this is kind of a close call. I would have him higher up if the Canadiens were struggling out the gate, but they've actually been playing pretty good hockey. They potentially, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but they're definitely going to be in the mix. And it's going to be a tough decision for Kent Hughes. They're not a San Jose. They're not a Chicago at this point. Do you bring back a Shawn Monahan who has had a lot of success, but he is 29 years old? You know what I'm saying? It's like if you sign him to a 3-year deal, you do risk that, yeah, maybe he's good the following year and maybe the following year after that. But what if it ends up being a bad contract in that 3rd year? And that's when the Montreal Canadiens are actually trying to win and go for it then. So in looking at Shawn Monahan, if I was Kent Hughes, I personally would trade him just because he has shown he's pretty injured. Yes, he has a very long injury history for the most part. He has not been able to stay healthy in recent years. So I personally would move off him. And I think at this point you could get a decent first-round pick, a mid to late first-round pick from a playoff team in terms of getting Shawn Monahan, especially considering he only makes $1.95 million in terms of his cap hit this year. You look at that, you half retain that $975K. In terms of that, you get a legit middle six, second line guy. I think teams will give up a first round pick for that. If he still had that $5-6 million cap hit, the return wouldn't be that impressive. But at that low cap hit, once half retained, it's a very good deal. And I think the Montreal Canadiens should definitely look into it. Up next at number 9, I got Dan Vladar. Dan Vladar in his 2 seasons in Calgary thus far, he has a .900 save percentage, which isn't fantastic, and a .282 goals against average. Just looking at the Calgary Flames, I think Vladar could be a good backup goalie. He is a solid backup goalie at this point, and there's definitely some teams that need goaltending. When looking at Calgary, they don't need goaltending, considering Markstrom is playing so good, and at some point, you need to give Dustin Wolf actually NHL time. Like he can't be playing in the AHL again. You need to give him 20 to 25 NHL games this year at the bare minimum, or else what are we doing? I feel horrible for the kid. He's won goalie of the year in the AHL 2 years ago, then goalie of the year and MVP, and he still doesn't have a full-time role at the NHL level. Something interesting about Vladar is apparently there's been LA Kings scouts at the Flames last couple games, so clearly the LA Kings, Talbot's playing great, but a guy like Phoenix Copley, would you take a Dan Vladar over a Phoenix Copley? I think that's a toss-up, but that would be interesting for them to have kind of like a rotating third backup goalie spot, whoever rises up to be Talbot's backup. So I think Dan Vladar, I would assume that he gets traded at this point. Up next at number 8, I still have Scott Laughton on the list. Scott Laughton and the Philadelphia Flyers are playing very good hockey, but I do think, like with last year, how they started off so hot, I think they are going to come back down to earth. And when looking at it, Scott Laughton, I don't think they're going to trade Carter Hart. I don't think they're going to trade Travis Konechny. Both of those guys are balling out. I don't think that, especially mid-season, they would get the value that they'd want, considering they are just utter studs right now. No one's going to give up an absolute haul for guys in their mid-20s at the trade deadline. So when looking at it, I think Scott Laughton still makes a lot of sense. He has 10 points in 17 games right now for a guy that's making only $3 million for the next 3 years. He is, I think, either 28 or 29 years old. But Scott Laughton is that third liner that teams dream of when it comes to the playoff time. He's physical. He can get you 45 to 50 points. He's a stud. I still think his name is going to be talked about a lot when it comes to trade rumors. And it wouldn't shock me if the Philadelphia Flyers end up moving off him. At number 7, Corey Perry. I got Corey Perry. He went from playing fourth line bottom minutes in Tampa Bay Lightning to stepping up on the Chicago Blackhawks, and he's killing it. He has 4 goals and 5 assists and 9 points right now in just 15 games. He's number 1 power play. He's playing fantastic on that number 1 power play right now. Chicago has a decent power play in part because of him. And when just looking at him overall, yes, he does have a $4 million cap hit. That would be kind of hard to move. Even at half retained, would you take Corey Perry to probably play third line, maybe even fourth line minutes on an actual contender? I think they would have to work something out where it is a double retained deal, but that is possible in today's NHL. You call up San Jose, they double retain. It's all good. We're off to the races. But just when looking at Corey Perry, obviously any contender would want a guy like Corey Perry, tough-nosed, has the experience, and even at $2 million, I think it could potentially work out. And if you're the Chicago Blackhawks, Corey Perry is definitely a good mentor, but what's the plan? If someone offers you a second-round pick for Corey Perry, are you saying no to that at this stage in your rebuild? I think that would be foolish. Connor Bedard is playing fantastic. He'll be fine with Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno as his leaders instead of a Corey Perry. Go out and get some assets for Corey Perry. Next up, number 6, John Klingberg. John Klingberg has obviously been horrendous defensively. I think when he's on the ice, it's something like 3.7 expected goals against. He's been brutal. He's an offensive defenseman. He came in to rack up points. He has 5 points in 14 games right now, and he's making $4.1 million. $4.15 million. Sorry, another $50,000 on top of that. But when looking at that, yeah, the Leafs might have to, if they make a big trade for maybe some other guys on this list, some other defensemen, they might have to attach a Klingberg and maybe even attach a pick just to get rid of the Klingberg contract. I think at this point, a second-round pick would be necessary just to dump the Klingberg contract, maybe even a first. It's that bad. He's been that unplayable for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They are actively, by far, it's not even a question. They're a worse team with John Klingberg on the ice, and it's not like he's making $1.5 or $2 million. $4.15, that is a good second pair defenseman that they could have got, that they thought they were getting in John Klingberg, but clearly has not been the case, so I think they could move off him and probably should. A guy that they might trade for at number 5 is Chris Tanev. Chris Tanev has been one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league. He's been in the top 5 percentile for the past 5 years. He is starting to get up there in age. He's 33. His numbers aren't quite as good as they have been in previous years, in part because the Flames have kind of been a dumpster fire, but Chris Tanev should net the Calgary Flames, in my opinion, probably a first-round pick. He is that good, and especially he's only making $4 million this year, so half retained, $2 million. That's for a guy like Chris Tanev, that is very good. The only reason why Tanev maybe isn't higher on this is I think the other 2 defensemen, not to spoil some of the higher people on this list, there's going to be a lot of Calgary Flames. The other defensemen on this list, there's really no chances that those guys stay. I could potentially see the Flames keep Chris Tanev on a 1 or 2 year deal, probably 2 year deal, to kind of mentor maybe that next generation of Flames defenseman. I don't think he's so out the door like the other guys that you're going to see later on this list. So he's at number 5, still very likely. Still, I would trade him if I was Craig Conroy. It doesn't really make sense to keep an expiring 33-year-old defenseman if you're not confident that you can re-sign him. Maybe they are, but Chris Tanev checks in at number 5. Number 4, I got a San Jose Shark. I think Anthony Duclair, a lot of teams are going to be very interesting in Anthony Duclair based on his track record. He's not playing great right now. He only has 5 points in 14 games right now for the San Jose Sharks, but even 5 points in 14 games on that team is 5th in the entire team. So he's been one of the better players for the San Jose Sharks. The San Jose Sharks have just been a bad team, and generally at 9 points in 20 games last year for the Panthers. His last fully healthy year, he had 31 goals, 27 assists for 58 points in 74 games. Obviously, he has not been the same player since he tore his Achilles back in the summer of 2022, I think. So when looking at that, yeah, he's definitely no longer the Anthony. He's not putting up 30 goal pace and stuff like that. But I think he is. I think he's going to be a very attractive third line scoring option for teams. There's a lot of teams that have history of Anthony Duclair being on their team. He's kind of hot from team to team for the most part. So when looking at Anthony Duclair, I think he definitely gets traded. That's why he's also high on this list, because he is an expiring guy. I think he's only making $3 million, so half retained, 1.5. Anthony Duclair can help a lot of teams bottom six scoring, so I think he is going to be a pretty desired guy, and by far the most desired guy on the San Jose Sharks. Next up, we got Elias Lindholm, and Elias Lindholm is kind of an interesting case because in the offseason, it was looking like he was going to get a Mark Scheifele like $8.5 million deal on like 6 to 7 years. That is obviously out the window. The Flames would be stupid to do that based on the spot that they are right now. It looks like he will probably get moved, and he still is. He's no longer 40-40 like when he was playing with Gaudreau and Tkachuk. I think we can all agree that was because he was playing with 2 top 10 wingers in the entire league that season, but he still has 12 points in 17 games. Last year he had 62 points. He's good defensively. He is that prototypical second line center on an actual playoff contending team. He's not a top line center. We've known that. I've been saying that for years. He's a good player, but definitely not a top. I wouldn't put him even in my top 25 centers probably. And when looking at him, I mean, they could get a haul for him just because he's only making $4.9 million this year. So speaking on, I think I've said it for every goddamn player, half retained Elias Lindholm at roughly $2.5 million. That is fantastic value for a team that really needs a second line center. So I think he probably will get traded now that the extension talks have kind of stopped. It doesn't really make sense if Calgary's going to go through kind of this mini retool rebuild to lock up a 28-year-old like Elias Lindholm on a long-term deal. And I think they can get like a first and a pretty decent prospect, like a B prospect for Elias Lindholm. And if you can do that, you 1000% do that. At number 2, shocker, it's another Calgary Flame. It is Noah Hanifin. Noah Hanifin, similarly to Lindholm, there was a lot of talks about an extension. He wanted I think they were like offering like a near Devon Tays kind of like 7 years, $7.2 million deal. Thankfully, for the Flames' sake, Hanifin did not end up taking that deal and now is an unrestricted free agent. I believe he's making $5.5 million this year. So again, it's a very movable contract. He stated multiple times, or at least there's been heavy speculation that because he's American, he doesn't really want to stay in Canada at all. So when looking at him compared to Lindholm, I think Hanifin is 1,000% gone in free agency, or 98% unless the Flames massively overpay, which I don't think they are going to now that they've been so disappointing in terms of the standings. So when looking at Hanifin, similarly to Lindholm, Hanifin has 12 points in 17 games, just like Lindholm. He's obviously a defenseman, which is more impressive. So I think you can get another very solid prospect package of like a first-round pick and a decent prospect. You look at this, they can really get good. The Flames are not in that bad of a spot if they trade Hanifin, if they trade Lindholm, if they trade Tanev, and if they trade Nikita Zadorov, who is number 1 on this list, obviously, because he straight up wants out. It's like Hanifin, Lindholm. It's an unspoken secret. Zadorov, it was so bad that his agent was like, get my guy the hell out of here. I think with Zadorov, very intriguing player. He is that ideal physical bottom pairing defenseman that every team wants to go deep in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He can score some goals. He had 14 goals last year, which was I think top 10 in the entire NHL in terms of defensemen. So when looking at that, he's that 6'6", 240, gets you 180 hits every single year. So I have him number 1 just because of the urgency, as I mentioned before. I think this gets done within the month. I think it was absurd when it broke that he wanted out. Like, people were like, Brad Treliving needs to can't let Zadorov get on that plane because it broke immediately after the Leafs game, during the Leafs game. That's absurd. Conroy's going to take his time with this. It's been a week already. I think he's going to take another week or two to file the best offers. You hear every day a new team is apparently in on Nikita Zadorov. So on looking at that, I think this is going to get done far before the trade deadline, just because obviously you want to gauge the market. Zadorov is not playing that good right now, too, so you want to maybe get him out sooner rather than later. And just the room, I can imagine how awkward that is with Zadorov. So I think Zadorov, the deal does get done relatively soon. And just overall, my top 10 is Zadorov, Hannafin, Lindholm, Duclair, Tanev, Klingberg, Perry, Lawton, Vladar, and Monahan. Let me know in the comments though. What do you think? Am I missing anybody massive? I don't think I am for the most part, but I want to hear from you guys, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.